Hey everyone, Brandon with FastDataScience.ai here, and welcome to another episode of This Week in AI. This is the show where I take a look at the latest news in machine learning, artificial intelligence, and data science, and I look for themes that I think are particularly important and maybe suggest different trends that are happening in the field. I then talk a little bit about the underlying data science that I think helps us understand what's happening with those trends, and then talk a little more broadly about implications. So today, the theme is all about the new creators, because AI is having a significant impact on the creator economy. And these articles that I read this week really help to demonstrate how important it is for us to understand what that impact might be. It all started when I read this article that foundation models are 2022's AI paradigm shift. But what's a foundation model, right? A foundation model is essentially an extremely large, if you will, deep learning architecture. Large meaning that we're training in these deep learning architectures billions or even trillions of different parameters and have multiple layers to help us produce outputs that are becoming more and more human-like. GPT-3 is probably one of the most famous foundation models, released a few years ago by OpenAI. GPT-3 is a conversational model that essentially is built around the corpus of language in the internet. The whole premise with GPT-3 is to learn how language is used so that if given a prompt, the model knows how to predict what the next most likely series of words should be to respond to that particular prompt. These foundational models have evolved very quickly in recent years to include multiple domains. And actually, just last week, we learned about a scary, crazy, weird creature called Loab, or Loab, or however you say it. Loab essentially was a creature that was created using one of these generative foundational multimodal models where a researcher, musician, or whatever the Twitter handler calls himself or herself, put in a series of different descriptions using words where the model outputs different images. Over time and through lots of different iterations of descriptions, Loab was created. So how do these multimodal, that is, models, deep learning models that can combine words to output images work? Well, in order to understand that, I actually took a look at this article here. Dolly to the Future of AI Research in OpenAI's Business Model. This is a fantastic article that really goes into detail about how Dolly was essentially built. Dolly is a multimodal foundational model that allows you to enter in a description using words, and the model outputs images that try and match the words that you've put in. It creates novel images that are actually quite detailed and really are making a big impression on how accurately they represent the descriptions that went into them. So how do these models work at a high level? Essentially, they're deep learning architectures, and they come from a family of deep learning architectures that are known as generative adversarial models, or GANs, or generative adversarial networks. Whew, say that 5 times fast. The whole idea, though, behind these multimodal architectures, in order to combine words and images, is it involves 2 separate approaches or methodologies. One is CLIP. The other is known as diffusion. So let's take a really quick look at what we mean by CLIP and diffusion. Essentially, CLIP models try to take images and the descriptions that are associated with those images to build embeddings of the relationships between the pixels in the images and the various words that are associated in the image captions. These embeddings are then fed into what are called diffusion models. Diffusion models are essentially like autoencoders. That is, they try and learn essential relationships between the input data, which in this case are encoded representations of pixels and images and words, and they filter those across lots of different layers in order to learn patterns of relationships that are common. These diffusion models then create noise that then use what was learned in the generative adversarial neural network training process, where you train two separate neural networks. I know this is getting very complicated, but the whole idea is to use the embeddings from the clip model to produce novel images based off of the encoded features that the model has learned in that generative adversarial architecture. Okay, so I know this is getting maybe a little too technical, but let's talk about some of the articles that really point out the implications of these new generative models that are allowing us to create new and interesting and very high resolution images. So I want to turn now to the first article that I found that I thought was really well written and did an excellent job of pointing to some of the implications around these generative models. This article comes from The Atlantic, and it's called Of God and Machines. The future of artificial intelligence is neither utopian nor dystopian. It's something much more interesting. In this particular article, the researcher talks about these generative models. And the researcher, who is also a journalist, talks about their relationship with GPT-3 and how GPT-3 actually helped to write a lot of this article. In fact, it's nearly impossible to tell which sections of the article are written by the author, the human, as opposed to GPT-3. This is really alarming and very interesting, and Stephen Markey, in this particular context, is a journalist who talks about some very significant implications to the creator economy. Another article that's related that also helps to further paint the picture of the significance of these generative models comes from this particular source, and it's called the AI Unbundling. In this particular news article, the author talks a lot about what's probably happening at a high level, and that is we're seeing how AI is being used to remove bottlenecks in information. So if we look at how new inventions have worked in history, they've worked and become successful because they've helped to remove bottlenecks in getting content to consumers. I'll show you an image that comes from this article that helps us to kind of understand this. The idea here is that we create something, we then have some substantiation of that creation, we want to find a way to duplicate it, distribute it, and then hopefully consume it or get it to consumers. This is fundamentally the creator's business life cycle. And different inventions have slowly started to remove different bottlenecks that are created across this distribution chain. Well, AI is starting to actually remove one of those bottlenecks, and that is the first bottleneck, creation and substantiation. These generative models are now being used in some instances, even by major news publications, as their themed images. So the question then becomes, what happens to artists, photographers, human creators, writers? I mean, imagine this. There could be a generative model for music. Maybe that model gets so good at creating music based off of learning from all kinds of different popular music songs that have been out in the world. And that model can then create 10,000 new songs in a single day. A producer could go through and pick 10 of those 10,000 songs that they like the best, that they think have the most commercial appeal, create an album, and effectively create an album almost every day. This has a significant impact, not just for the rate at which things like this can be created, entertaining things like music or artistic things like images, but it has implications for how fast we as consumers get access to that. It also has implications for us as creators. What does it mean for the human creator? What does it mean for us to be able to continue to understand who the real creators are? Are the future creators just data scientists who know how to train these models? I mean, after all, Artists make their money by selling their ability to do unique things. And if these AI models are getting so good that we can't tell whether or not they came from a human or a machine, where does that leave us? What happens to our economy? What happens to our creator economy? These questions may mean that we all become consumers. A conversation that I actually had just yesterday with my dad and my stepmom and my wife, where we were all really trying to pontificate on what the real implications are here. So I'd like to hear from you. Comment, subscribe, please share this channel with other folks as I get better at trying to bring in a little bit of an explanation about data science and its significance in our society and for the future of where we go. So remember, don't just be data driven, be data science driven. Have a great weekend, blah, 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 blah. And I hope that you tune in next week as these shows increasingly get more and more well informed by all the people who are starting to give me great feedback. So thank you for watching. And again, tune in next week for another edition of This Week in AI. Bye, buddy.